food is being used as a sort of the wake-up call. Do you know this is what's happening to this or that? And we need to take those kind of actions to minimize the impact of climate change and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as quickly as possible for the sake of our coffee, or whatever it takes to wake people up.
Thank you all for joining us today to watch this to listen, engage your brain, to wrap your mind around the conversation we're going to have today with Mike Hoffman, who is associated with Cornell University, one of the land-grant universities. It's also not very well known, but it's part of the Ivy League. Cornell is an Ivy League school, for whatever that means to the Americans in the audience. It's esteemed. And it's Cornell's mission, as is Mike's, is pretty much food. The refinement of people and techniques on how we grow our food. So we're talking with Mike today, who's studied and expressed a whole lot about how we grow our food now and how we will be growing our food. And so we're looking to Mike to clean off his crystal ball and tell us what we have to put into the future hopper in order to get things to come out marginally right. Now, with me is Dale Wall-Conan. She's the associate producer. I'm Stuart Scott, executive producer of Facing Future, because that's what we're here doing. We're facing our future. Okay, let's take it away. Dale, what would you like to address first with Mike?
Well, Mike, you've done a fantastic job of going through most of our foods and what's going to be happening with them based on climate change. Warmer winters, warmer nights are having a tremendous effect on how crops are able to grow. And you've actually gone through and looked at all our common foods to see, what will happen with them in different parts of the world. We know we're going to have to shift our agriculture, which arguably is one of the largest sectors of our climate change problem and an emitter of greenhouse gases. So I wonder maybe what you'd like to begin with, perhaps our beverages, which are so dear to all of our hearts.
As we describe in our book, we talk about a typical dinner menu, and we start with those wonderful beverages at the beginning: wine, beer, and distilled spirits. And what's interesting is the number of stories that one can discover, like a Belgian beer is having trouble because it produced during the wintertime, and winters are warming. So they're having difficulty going through the fermentation process in the winter. I like the humorous story about what's called the angel share. When you age bourbon out of doors, mostly, they lose about 2% by volume every year to diffusion through the oak. Well, it's getting warmer, and the angels are taking a bigger share, and this amounts to tens of millions of dollars every year. Wine grapes in California, it's getting pretty hot.
Well, hold on a second. So we're talking about tens of millions of dollars of what? Of wine, alcohol?
Bourbon lost by diffusion through the barrels.
Well, I don't know if we're going to have too many people too concerned about bourbon.
Well,
wait a minute. I love Manhattans. I love my Manhattans.
Yes.
Well,
we may not need alcohol in the future, but there are many things we will need, and that's where we're most concerned.
Let's go to the food crops. Let's go to the story about food essentials and how it's going to impact everyone.
Dale brought up warmer nights. Few people realize that actually, if it's getting already too warm for potato production in parts of the world, nighttime temperatures.
Potato production.
And there are some people worried that potato production globally will be in very serious trouble by 2050 with warming nights. And potato is a staple crop for a lot of people.
Lest we forget, it's also a staple crop for vodka.
I Glad you brought that up. I wasn't going to go back there, but yes.
Well, that was the classic disaster in Ireland, the potato famine. And we didn't
Right.
learn about monocultures at that point, and we still are
Yeah.
making the same mistake.
Well, that was yeah, a disease, but let's talk about warmer winters.
Yes.
Winters are warming twice as fast as summers in the US. And most fruit and nut trees require a winter dormant spell that is induced by cold temperatures.
Mhm.
Well, it's getting warmer. In 2017, Georgia, the peach state, had very few peaches because the preceding winter was too warm.
Ah,
If you think about California, where it's already a fairly moderate temperature, warming winters a few years ago hit the pistachio crop, causing $300 million in losses. The preceding winter was too warm.
Mhm.
But scientists have determined how many hours or days of chill is required so they can predict, as winters warm, when fruit and nut crops, say in California, will no longer be viable. By the end of the century, it's going to be pretty serious. However, there are no doubt breeding programs that we have time to try to keep up to the warming, but it is a huge risk, increasing risk to our fruit and nut trees around the world.
I'll
Do you
have to
think
say that
agriculture will shift north? Is that going to be a necessity as farmland is, a number of factors. The water we're using is drying up and will by the end of the century be a very serious problem in the United States because we're still using most of our water very foolishly in our agricultural paradigm where we raise all these crops for feeding farm animals and cows rather than using cropland to feed people directly. So we're really wasting our budget there in a very frightening way.
Well, let's just think that climate change has now made a normal drought in the Southwest a mega drought that could last for many years. And that has enormous implications for not only the people living there, but agriculture in that area. But you mentioned moving north. Well, again, winters are warming, so some crops can move further north. They just simply will move further north. In Europe, wine grapes are moving north. There's interest in new wines in England. Some of the vineyards in California are experimenting by moving north into Oregon and Washington, but of course, there may not be room for all of the vineyards up there because there's already a city there or
there's
another
already
crop.
stuff growing. There's already people who own it, who are
Yes,
family farmers farming something else, which may not be ready to move yet. So we're experiencing a collapsing of the amount of farmland overall.
right. Well, you can also move to higher altitudes. Like several years ago, I was in Costa Rica. Well, it's getting warmer in the lowlands, so you move that plantation up. But of course, at some point, you run out of an opportunity to go up any further. There's nothing there.
Right, I'm visualizing the pinnacle of the mountain and we get to the top and there's very little land at the top.
Right.
That's kind of what we're doing in that scenario.
What are we looking at in aggregate in terms of our ability to feed ourselves?
Well, I guess it depends where you are on the planet. If you're in an area where you are dependent on rainfall and have limited opportunities for irrigation, and because of increasing droughts, that's going to put a lot of pressure on those areas of the world that are already dry. Because the future, in a nutshell, is areas in the world that are wet today will get wetter, dry areas will get drier. So I think it's the capacity to adapt is really important. Now, in wealthy countries like the US and Europe, we have that capacity if we have the will to make the changes that we need. But in the US, there was a great article in ProPublica last September that visually depicts how the livability for humans, as well as the success of crops, is going to move north. And worst case scenario, as far as climate change, they show by 2040 to 2060, a huge shift north. I mean, it's actually quite frightening to see,
Well, for us,
because
this is
it'll
one
be
thing.
too hot. Essentially, the livability factor, humidity, heat, etc. I assume you could still live there and live in an air-conditioned environment all the time, but people are going to be moving north,
Use greenhouse gases.
and some of the staple crops will not succeed, and they will also shift north.
So what was the article or the image? Where was that drawn from? Nature?
ProPublica, yeah, it's based on. I think it is from Nature, but they visualized it. They showed how the map, basically visually showing the people or the livability space moving north in North America.
Please send us that link after this
Sure.
conversation. And we'll
It's
insert
one
it.
thing for us in North America and Europe, but it's quite another for people in southern latitudes, Mexico, South America, Africa, India. All of these places will become less and less livable, and certainly it will hit them sooner to not be able to grow the crops that they are now growing. How can we mitigate that for the rest of the world, that where it's even more on the edge, shall we say?
Well, we can start reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, globally, that's what we need to do to at least minimize the impact of climate change, which is here and it's going to be with us. But again, I think as a country with the capacity to do that, we ought to be doing everything possible. That also affects our seas. There aren't much you can do about essentially the fish in the ocean other than manage harvest much better than currently. But when it comes to just sort of saving what's out there, it's the big picture. We have to reduce emissions.
Well, in the oceans, I don't know if you've seen the film Seaspiracy and how accurate that is, but it does point out that the fishing industry is so enormous that we're grossly overfishing. And this is, maybe we in this, in the privileged part of the world need to reduce our use of large fish, certainly tuna, salmon, and other fish as well, because all fishing affects the larger animals in the sea who are caught in the nets, and bycatch is a big problem. Scraping the bottom of the sea is a huge problem, and our loss of the plankton, the phytoplankton, is incredibly serious. But we could help by changing our diets, could we not? In many ways, by having less kind of proteins.
Right. Aquaculture is rapidly growing. And if done in an environmentally sensitive way, it's a reasonable alternative. I can't quote exactly the figures, but the proportion of quote farmed fish is increasing worldwide simply because there's demand for fish, yet we need a way to obtain those, and aquaculture may be an option.
That's a great solution, because those fish require food, and that food comes from the larger sea. Also, those fish are in confined operations where you have a lot more disease, and those diseases get out into the wild.
Bill, I'm gonna interject, because you're shooting down a viable intervention, and your objections are well taken, but we're not going to find a perfect. I mean, we're open to debate here, so this is not.
Certainly, we're open to debate. I'm just saying that perhaps we could reduce our use of fish, and the rest of the world might be able to eat.
Let's put that one on the table so everybody sees it clearly. You're vegan, aren't you? Yes.
Not completely. No? I mean, I love fish as much as anyone else. But it's very hard for me as well. I grew up on meat and potatoes and all this kind of stuff, but as I learned the environmental impact of these things, I changed my diet so that I eat considerably less of it. I'm not a complete vegan.
There we go. Okay, I want to have our biases exposed so that people watching this aren't going to have these things running through their mind and saying, oh, why didn't they talk about, because we get a lot of comments, why didn't they talk about? My answer is, give me a break. We got a half hour to get everything in, and you want me to talk about birth control too? And yes, we need to reduce human population. But the point is, whether you love fish or hate fish, we are reducing our capacity to grow food. Our agriculture is being pushed northward on the globe, and it's being pushed up in altitude to try to find the conditions at which the crops that we now depend upon will thrive. And it doesn't take a PhD to realize that there's only so much further north you can move, and there's only so much higher on the mountain you can go. So we got it. We're between a rock and a hard place.
I'm
And,
only pointing out that if we alter our diet now so that we're, for example, a lot of our food is transported in shipping and in air, and this takes a lot of energy, it's refrigerated. We could look at what is the carbon impact of our diet, because we are the ones who are consuming so much more, and we are responsible for the rest of the world, which is going to suffer much more than we are. So a little alteration in our diet now, you know, and what we find essential to grow or eat or drink may be extremely helpful. This is something everyone can do.
Let me go back to seafood. What's happening in the oceans is squid and octopus love the new conditions. So that may be a transition that will be on our plate in the future. More of those rather than the traditional fish. And I'll go back to aquaculture. We've done everything in our book and website to make it science-based. So aquaculture, if done right, disease is not necessarily an issue. If done right, they circulate the water and so on. And we still need that protein. And I consider that a legitimate option if done appropriately.
I have seen it done well, where the water is circulating.
Sure.
Smaller
Well,
scale. It's the large scale that becomes so difficult.
in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, they took out the mangroves. Well, we did with Agent Orange. They've been replaced. And now if you do it correctly, sort of ecologically farm shrimp in mangroves, it's a very sustainable system. One, you've got the mangroves there to still prevent damage from sea surges, and the mangroves, the shrimp feed within the mangroves, almost, you know, like on a subsistence diet that's there, and they're harvested as opposed to doing it in confined spaces.
Well, certainly our ingenuity could produce some incredibly better paradigms. For example, we could switch from monocultures to diversifying our crops. And I think that is happening in farmland across America. We're planting more cover crops, we're rotating crops. We've understood that tillage is not such a good idea. We want to minimize it. There are many wonderful things that people are doing, and you know, silvopasture as opposed to having animals in confinement is a very good idea. So I'm with you there.
Dale, I'm going to ask you to define silvopasture.
Silvopasture.
Silvopasture, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's essentially grazing, grazing cattle within somewhat open forested areas. The trees are still there. You may plant legumes on the ground for the cattle to feed on. The shade provides a little cooling for the animals. It's a pretty viable option where you have the appropriate setting and forested land, and you can actually, in some parts of the world, they make money off those trees. They may, you know, there may be nuts or something, or they can occasionally harvest the trees. So it's a pretty balanced system.
Okay.
Well, this is where we could have, you know, the exciting news that we can, you know, make changes now that will be very important and effective in the future. And I think you're exploring a lot of those.
If I could go back also to diversification, correct. That is one of what is called one of the actions you can take, what's called climate smart farming. It's diversify. So, okay, you lose 2 crops to climate change or severe weather, you still have others to depend on for an income. But for large scale agriculture, they're also making a lot of advances, even in monocultures, with GPS. So they're applying fertilizers just where they need it. You can irrigate fields with, like vineyards in California, they almost know how much each vine needs for water, and they just provide the amount of water that's necessary through sophisticated drip systems. They're doing that in almonds in California as well. They're covering the ground with almond hulls and other mulches to retain the moisture. So there's a lot of activities, I'll call them climate smart or even common sense activities, are growing across all scales of agriculture, not just small, not just large.
Well,
But
we've
don't
got
you
to,
think it's true that if you raise the same crop on the same land every year, that eventually you've depleted certain resources in the land, and that really you need in almost all cases to do cover crops or to diversify the
Sure.
use of the land?
A lot of large scale farmers are using cover crops, minimum till. So they're doing those very things you're saying.
Right. I would like to see the much less pesticide being used and you know, a better system of fertilizer than we have now, because we are creating a lot of waste that we don't really know what to do with, especially, you know, when it comes to animal agriculture. And you know, I know there are some ideas about methane use for energy, and maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about that kinds of possibilities as we raise animals. What can we do to make that system?
Well, manure management is a big issue when it comes to methane emissions, let alone the enteric digestive system of the animals are producing the methane through burps, released by burping. But for these systems where you're accumulating manure, there are the things called anaerobic digesters, which essentially you can find the waste in a large container. It digests, produces methane, which can be used to back on the farm or to produce electricity. In some cases, that electricity is sold back to the grid. The units are quite expensive. And there aren't that many in the US compared to, say, Germany, where I think that industry is subsidized by the government. So there's more anaerobic digesters. But then again, a lot of our communities also use anaerobic digesters just for the waste they collect.
We're talking about and moving toward is a circular, like in a circular economic economy. We're talking about understanding everything in cycles of nature, that there is no waste that's actually waste in nature, and there shouldn't be waste in our system either. And if we
Well,
can understand that, maybe we can
yeah.
use our waste in a positive way so that it
Right.
contributes.
As far as food waste, most of that happens at the consumer end. So we can change our behaviors
How do we
and
do
what we
that?
purchase, what better understand date of purchase on the product. That's where the biggest mistakes are often made. People see that and they, oh, you know, the date passed, and they throw it away. But in fact, that's the date of purchase, not the date of use. There's always confusion, sometimes confusion about that date.
It says best consumed by, and it actually, what it's doing statistically, it's giving a date after which it doesn't want, it being the industry, the grocer, the producer of that food stuff, doesn't want to be blamed for spoilage. So
Right.
naturally, if I don't want to be blamed for spoilage, I'm going to set that date in close enough to today that 95 to 99% of my product is still good. But I'm going to err on the cautious side. Okay, I'm going to put a date in that is cautious, so that little part that may go bad, I don't have to worry about. I'm not going to be getting
Right.
problems growing in that. What I'm trying to say is that it's set for the date is set for the manufacturer, not for the wise consumer. The wise consumer smells it, sees, is this still fresh enough to eat or not, and they eat it if it is so. But I know my ex-wife is religious about those expiration dates, and if the minute it gets to the expiration date, it's out, which that's fine, but that creates
Right.
food waste. That's built into the system.
Well, there are organizations that are gathering up imperfect foods and foods that are, you know, would otherwise be, they don't, ugly fruits and things that you can't market for some reason, you know. So all of those kind of enterprises are really an opportunity for people to get in and create, you know, new markets for products that are being wasted. But you know, you're right. Of course, the consumer is the one that is wasting. But if you go on a cruise ship or you go to a hotel or something like that, the amount of food wasted is just staggering, because they won't put it out again. So throw it away. You know, amazing amounts you know, what George Bernard Shaw called wretched excess is going on. We could maybe look at some of that.
You asked earlier, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mike. Yeah.
You asked earlier about meat, red meat.
Mhm.
That's one of the main topics. Our approach is, first of all, bear in mind that a lot of the world, a lot of the developing world, red meat is important to their nutrition. That animal is a tractor, that animal may be a source of milk, and it's also a source of red meat. So for us in the US to say stop eating meat globally is just not appropriate.
Culturally, I want to be very culturally correct and not espouse veganism is the solution, because yes, there are cultures that are dependent upon the herds in a very holistic way, and
right.
we're not putting a one size fits all, no more meat onto.
No. It's our approach is to treat red meat as a delicacy,
Yeah,
not a staple.
sure.
Because if you just say to someone, you can no longer eat red meat, you've lost that audience.
No,
if they
it's a
like that occasional
cow,
hamburger,
you know, as we know.
like that occasional hamburger, like I do. We eat relatively red meat, but once in a while, I'll have some. We'll have some. And I think there are there are better grazing methods that are being developed where methane production by the animals is lessened. You can feed seaweed, a small amount of seaweed to cattle to reduce methane emissions. There's some commercial products that may be out at some point that also help with that. But there are a variety of ways to continue to raise red meat in an environmentally sensitive way. But again, going back to treating it as a delicacy versus a staple would be a huge step in the right direction.
Well, you know, it's the industrial raising of animals that has really created this huge problem, because we're raising, you know, soy and corn, and we're using our agricultural land for feed for these feedlots instead of using our agricultural land and our water wisely. So in that sense, that's where I really worry about it, because that's where we're squandering essential resources at this point that could better be used. Land could be better used, and not, you know, corn depletes the land.
But what do we do with those tens of thousands of farmers and everybody else involved in the red meat industry? What do we do with the coal miners?
What do we do?
How do we help them?
Miners? What do we do with the fossil fuel? You know, we have to make a transition. And
Dale, your bias is coming through a little too strong for me. I'm going to be blunt.
Okay.
Very good. You be blunt. She's coming. Her bias coming out.
Fine. You know,
the story I tell is science-based. We try to, as best as possible, to keep emotion out of it. Although I get very emotional about climate change, I cry at times because I will follow what's going on. I know too much. I sent a copy of that book to my daughters and I just wept. So I'm there, but I'm sorry.
We have replaced the wildlife on the earth. We've lost 60% of the wildlife on the earth. That's indisputable. And instead we have replaced it with ourselves and with our food animals. And so, you know, in order to help the wildlife of the earth return, we're going to have to give back some of that land that we're now using to graze, to grow feed crops. That, you know, it's not that I'm, you know, vegan and I'm speaking, you know, we can't do this. I'm just saying that practically speaking, we do need to look at what we are doing to the habitats of the world in order to have the kind of diet we have. And I don't think that's a bias. I think that's just.
No, and I agree with what you just said. Yes, I agree with what you just said.
Okay, good. We're on the same page then that way.
But I'm, you know, it's not always black and white, and there's a human side to all of this. For example, in the book, we interviewed a sheep farmer at the headwaters of the Colorado River in Wyoming. 3,000 sheep, 50 sheepdogs, a family operation. And he said, no one's ever talked to me about what's going on. And he's gotten sustainability awards for how he operates and rotates the sheep across the land.
Mhm.
He also mentioned they can no longer ride horse in the forest because
Because
the trees are dead because of bark beetles. It's too dangerous. So his life, I mean, it's right there. And what does he do in a drought? And he has to buy feed for this true dry, and that's obviously expensive. But there's somebody who I think really respects the land and is trying to do the best thing, yet he's raising animals. And
Certainly
he's trying
you
to do it
raise
the right
animals.
way.
You can raise animals and you can rotate, where they're feeding, and there can be wonderful systems. We know Polyface Farm and other places have worked on this. It's the scale, as you say, meat has to be a delicacy because we can't continue to replace all of the animals on this earth with what we like to eat.
Well, we might want to consider some of these plant-based meat products too. They're expanding in
Mhm.
the market. They have a much lower carbon footprint, and I'll have one of those occasionally, just as often as I have a regular burger, and they're very tasty.
Yes, yeah. I'll second that. I experiment with the different brands, trying to find the ones that suit my palate, because not all of them do.
Well, most of the world, I have to differ with you, Mike, in that there are places where, the reindeer are essential, or, people are herders still. But for the most of the world, we have a much more animal intensive diet than the rest of the world. Plants are much higher on the menu, which maybe will bring us back to grains and what's happening with, say, rice and wheat in our future, because that's going to be really essential for feeding the world.
So what does your crystal ball say about rice and wheat, Mike?
Well, let's just say rice, and again, back to nighttime temperatures, it's the same thing. The yields of rice will drop as CO2 levels increase.
Mhm.
The other thing with rice is as carbon dioxide levels rise, so the scientists have done experiments where you raise rice or wheat or whatever under higher levels of carbon dioxide, vitamin B drops by 30%.
Mm.
You also lose some of the essential minerals and proteins. So on a global scale, because rice is important to about 3 billion people around the world, that is an ominous threat in my mind that lies in the future. But again, I think there's a lot of effort going on around the world to breed more resilient varieties, and with the right investments, we could hopefully keep up on that and develop varieties that maintain the nutritional quality.
How about palm oil? Because that's a place where, we know we're losing a lot of rainforests to these palm oil plantations. And it's in everything. You talk about labels. Everything I look at has palm oil in it. I try to buy things with no palm oil, and it's really hard because it's so ubiquitous. Is there something we can do to substitute palm oil, something else?
When you say palm oil is in everything, it is, and it's not just food, it's cosmetics and and so many other things. It's everywhere. We did not include palm oil in the book, and I'm trying to think right now. I suspect there are better sources of oil, maybe canola and others, but my guess is palm oil somehow cheap. It has the characteristic people want, and that's why it's used like it is. Yeah, when I see pictures of deforestation to put in palm oil plantation, it's difficult to accept.
Yeah, it's an enormous tragedy, really.
Right.
Of, of land and wildlife that have been lost in order to
Yeah,
produce.
exactly.
I just think of the poor orangutan that we're driving. I mean, doesn't even have to be extinction, which extinction is a terribly cold and an unfeeling concept. There's no emotions when you talk about it. To me, extinction is but when you see the individual animals and they're trying to, if they're lucky, the animal is trying to be coaxed out of it, the last tree standing. The
Yeah.
whole forest around them has been pushed down. They're
Right. Yeah.
Tremendous death, and what will make, not even the news, what will make it back to us is the videos of the one that was spared, that some worker, caught, or
Exactly. Yeah.
it's horrible. So, and these
Yeah.
are feeling sentient beings. These are not. I mean, what we do for money is just hopelessly cruel.
Right. Could I offer a direction to take just briefly?
Please
Um,
push us in whatever direction we need to.
the message that we have worked so hard on is to convey to people in the US and developed countries that the menu is changing.
Mhm.
And food, because it gets over it is a way to get around something called psychological distance, because when you talk about climate change and you mention melting glaciers in Greenland, well, yeah, that's not in my backyard.
Yeah.
Or the year 2100, well, I'll be dead. But food is there, it's relevant multiple times a day, and we enjoy it as part of our family histories, part of our cultures, and it's personal. So that's why we like, this is a first. No one has really done this in a comprehensive way. So we're taking that personal thing called food that we all enjoy and trying to tell stories about it. And the way we do it is, one, there are no villains. We all eat. We all depend on each other. We're all in this together, and we can all find solutions, work together.
Intervention.
But, right. Interventions.
Yeah.
And we start by celebrating food to get people's attention. I mean, not my mother's sauerkraut, but maybe her mashed potatoes I remember fondly. Or pecan pie. I mean, those things, or that Manhattan I'm going to have in about a half hour and the bourbon. So we celebrate food. That's how we start out this story as we go through the menu.
Mm.
And then who and where, who grows it, and where does it come from? I can go to the grocery store and get anything I want. And the other day I started looking at labels up here, and we have stuff from Trinidad. It's just amazing when you start to look where it comes from, and spices, bay leaves, Turkey. Who would know? Who would guess?
Mm-hmm.
But most people don't realize that. And by doing that, we also can talk about the frailty of the food system. The Suez Canal was blocked by that large container ship. Those things are going to happen in the future because of climate change. And the people, there are real people out there growing foods. There's a family growing cacao in Western Africa, making $4 a day. And we enjoy the chocolate. So I think it's really important to not point fingers, because there's somebody you're pointing at. And then finally, what is being done and what can be done. We're attempting to use food as a mechanism to raise awareness about climate change at large, so that we switch to renewable energies, we reduce our fossil fuel consumption. It's all of those other things, but food is being used as a sort of the wake-up call. Do you know this is what's happening to this or that? And we need to take those kind of actions to minimize the impact of climate change and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as quickly as possible for the sake of our coffee.
So Mike, I want to go upscale a little bit in height. I want to take a 10,000 foot view. What should we be doing as a society, as individuals? So you can separate those into two categories. What should we be doing?
To maintain our food supply?
And our Earth, life on Earth.
I wanted to leave that part up to you as well. What should we be doing? And you decide on what the goals are. You set this. You've got a clean canvas. Okay, so what should we be doing to improve our situation, our being a very global hour, all of humanity, all of living species. What should we be doing with what
Well, I'm
we-
going to pick up on some earlier comments, but I think leadership is needed. And as a country, this country, hopefully that's returning.
Mm,
And we can set an example for the rest of the world. We need to, we need to come together around this grand challenge.
what was that chuckle?
Come together,
No,
join forces.
you chuckled. What was the chuckle about?
Oh, well, the divisiveness we now face in this country is just
Horrendous.
there again. Everybody eats. Is that an inroad? I don't know, but is that an inroad? So I think it's all hands on deck, and it's not next month, it's tomorrow that we need to start to take action. Some call it a climate crisis. I think someone from the UN called it, we're stepping into an abyss. It's sit around the table, I'll talk for an hour about all the changes going on in your food.
I was going to say it can be the subject for conversation around the dinner table.
Yes.
Yeah.
So just to summarize, I guess it's get informed, get involved, everybody. It's political, get political,
Mm-hmm.
and speak up, raise your voices. I'm speaking to the US, but I'm speaking as a country that is in a position to lead.
Yes.
We also have the capacity, the resources to bring about the change. It's having the will.